Oh, man, it's already Thursday. Welcome to Stand Up. Joining me today, veteran and very highly respected author now of 4 books, the author of a new novel called Daybreak. It's Matt Gallagher back on the show. Matt, really great guy. You're going to love our conversation. I think his new book, Daybreak, does a lot to impress upon Americans how important the war in Ukraine is to Ukrainians and the reality of it all, because Matt's been there 3 times now, and he's written yet another novel about it. Great guy, great book, great interview. I think you're going to love it. We start at 21 minutes in today's show. But I've got your headlines and sound clips as I do every day. It's Thursday, so we will hang out tonight. Excited to see you tonight at 8 p.m. I like the hangouts when they are on Thursdays, and that is today, 8 p.m. East. Be there. If you're a subscriber, you'll get a link in the show notes. If you don't, send me an email for that and any other reason at standupwithpete@gmail.com, and we will get you taken care of. I hope to see you tonight at 8 East. Speaking of emails, I got a long, interesting email from a listener last night named Dave, who said he listens to the show almost every night when he's falling asleep, and then said that the volume of John Carroll's song at the end of the show is too loud. It becomes very loud, and it upsets him. And so maybe I'll bring that down for you, Dave. But more importantly, he went on to be very critical of kind of the style of the show, which I appreciated. He said, I regularly listen to your show at bedtime. I think it's mainly because it's predictable in content, mostly Democratic, partisan to ultra partisan rhetoric. As a centrist lefty, I find it easy to follow the dialogue and lines of thinking. Many of the talking points and perspectives are extremely familiar to me, and that irks me are very familiar to me. I say it's not to insult, but to add perspective. I'm a fan. I listen to 90% of the episodes, 90% of all episodes. He says, I respect wanting to challenge how people think, and I presume you're trying to change people's minds. I'm just not sure your show changes many minds. Well, Dave, I don't know. I'm not positive that I'm trying to change minds per se. I mean, I'm not sure that's necessarily my responsibility or even possible. I think more than anything else, I'm trying to learn from experts and get perspectives different from my own or more informed than my own on a wide range of issues that impact me, my family, my country, the planet, obviously. Dave went on to say you and your guests often mock people outside your demographic, culturally, economically, and politically. It's not uncommon to hear accents mocked, viewpoints demonized, calling folks names. That's all great if you want to appeal to folks that already agree with you. I mean, maybe it is. However, if you want anyone to actually consider your ideas to challenge their own, you can never make your points in bad faith. Boy, that one I don't, I don't know. I guess give me examples of making points in bad faith. I hate to think that anybody ever interprets any of the points I make in bad faith. But finally, he goes on to say that guests like Bill Boyle and Mara Quint indirectly call him stupid, uneducated, or unempathetic with snappy quips and a jovial tone. I'm none of those things, and honestly, as a barely partisan person, I'm extremely used to being dunked on by both sides of the partisan divide. My point here is you're not trying to change the views of people like me. Whose are you trying to change, or what is the point? Well, you raised some good questions. I reached out to Dave, and if anybody else shares that point of view, I'd be more than happy to talk to you on the phone or on a Zoom. Maybe we could all gather. So if Dave's points resonate with you, then meet me on a special Zoom about how we can talk and discuss the nuances of this program and this conversation and the guests, because he didn't say anything specific in the email about any issues or anything that's being said. I guess I also am not sure that, and I don't mean to be too defensive, I welcome the criticism, but when he says you and your guests often mock people outside your demographic, well, what is my demographic? It says culturally and economically and politically. I don't know. We have a really diverse audience ethnically and economically and certainly culturally. But to answer the question, it's a fair and good one. What is the point? I think the easiest answer, Dave, and everybody else, is the point's to learn. The show has always been about getting the smartest people I can to come on and talk about issues that I don't know that much about. And I've never passed myself off as an expert. I've tried really hard not to do that on almost any issue. But tomorrow I'm talking to Barry Ritholtz about finance on so many issues that I just have a very elementary understanding of. The same with someone like Dr. Arthur Kaplan, bioethics, Dr. Aaron Carroll on health policy, Dean Baker on economics. It's always been about learning, really. I mean, that's why I love to have people on who aren't like me. A lot of black folks, a lot of women, a lot of Jewish folks, gay people, trans people. I'm always looking for guests to learn from. I guess I'm not necessarily thinking about changing your mind. I don't know what you're thinking, really, honestly. And while it might have been that way on some issues and in the past and different iterations of this show, really more than anything, I feel like I'm trying to understand and help folks understand what the hell is happening in our country and in our world by learning from people who spend their lives and careers trying to figure it out and who are good at explaining things. So we're also creating a really wonderful community of people that have a certain kind of set of shared values, by the way, which I feel are broad and general and not always exactly the same, but mostly really well-meaning folks who care about human rights and civil rights and scientific evidence and journalism, democracy. I could go on and on. All right, well, I appreciate the note, Dave, and it gives me the opportunity to kind of answer some of what you're saying and talk a little bit about what we're trying to do here, remind people what we're trying to do here, and including me. So I greatly appreciate that you listen to the show. Your email had quite an impact on me, obviously, made me think about things, and I'm super grateful for that from anybody, anytime. But wait, one more point. One thing that I wish that I could have done a better job explaining throughout my career, sitting behind this microphone, and it's mostly been this actual microphone. Someday they'll probably cover it in gold and throw it in a landfill. But that point is that I come from the sticks. I come from rural America. I definitely grew up in rural America. I mean, it's outside Syracuse, but look at where I grew up. Look at the community I grew up, surrounded literally by farms. I mean, the ideology that I grew up around, a lot of it, especially with my extended family, with the evangelicals, everybody was hunting and fishing and cow tipping and all of the stuff. Granted, I left there when I was 17 years old, but the idea that I don't understand what rural Americans or conservative Americans are thinking has always really, really bothered me. I fully understand it. I think I understand it intimately. I think it's what makes me more well-rounded as a host, a journalist, an American, a man. So I do just want to say that sometimes people say to me, "You don't understand what they're thinking out in Kansas." No, I do. Ask me. I'll tell you. And a lot of it is simply not necessarily values that don't align, but so much of it is what they are being told by their favorite radio host or Fox News or any of its tributaries. That's very true of progressive Americans as well. And that's why overwhelmingly I've tried to focus on talking to experts on issues more than anything else. Highly educated, highly experienced, highly credible folks. And that's what I pride myself here on getting on the program. I mean, I think today's guest, Matt Gallagher, is a perfect example of that, by the way. You try to tell me where you think he lands on the political spectrum. All right. Well, rarely do I really go off on a bit of a monologue like that, but I thought I wanted to address that. Thank you for indulging. Let's get to your headlines. Of course, yesterday's big story was a shooting at the Kansas City Chiefs champion Super Bowl parade. Police said one person died. 22 people suffered gunshot wounds just after the Chiefs parade ended and the rally at Union Station, which I guess is their train station. The hospital there confirmed it was treating 12 patients, 11 of whom were children. The hospital stated that 9 of those patients have gunshot wounds. The Kansas City Police Department stated that 3 armed people were taken into custody for more investigation. I'm sure we'll have a lot more details on that shooting within the next 24 hours, but some quick reactions. Shannon Watts of Moms Demand writes, over 800 police officers were at the parade today, and over 1 million civilians are allowed to be armed there in Kansas City, yet they couldn't stop a dozen people from being shot because more guns make us less safe. The Giffords organization put out a tweet. 16 years ago today, 5 people were killed, 17 injured at Northern Illinois University. 6 years ago today, 17 people were killed and 17 injured at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School. Today, there was a shooting after the Chiefs Super Bowl parade. We are constantly grieving. Yeah, I did see several people marking the 6-year anniversary of the Parkland school shooting. Just terrific. We'll know more about the details and motivations, if there were any, of those shooters. So I'm not jumping to any conclusions on today's episode and moving on to your next headline. And this one comes from the House Intelligence Committee, where the chairman, a Republican named Mike Turner, released an unusual statement yesterday warning of a, quote, serious national security threat without providing additional details. But he preempted what the White House said was a planned briefing for congressional leaders. 4 sources with knowledge of the issue told NBC News that the threat that they're talking about is Russian military capabilities. So, oh wait, now it's being reported out a little bit more. Two sources familiar with deliberations on Capitol Hill said the intelligence has to do with Russia wanting to put nuclear weapons in space. Oh, okay. Well, that doesn't seem to be too big of a deal. You know what? Listen, if they want to weaponize space, let them weaponize space, because these other countries aren't paying their dues for space. And so I don't care. Let them do it. All right. Well, let's see what else we have here for you. Can't be any worse than that. How about this story? The number of people crossing illegally into the United States from Mexico has dropped by 50% in the past month. Authorities said on Tuesday. President Biden, of course, under pressure from both parties over security at the border, but Republicans turned down their own plan for security on the border, and yet the number of people illegally crossing has dropped by 50%. So that's a pretty interesting statistic. That will probably go underreported. As will this. North Korea on Wednesday fired multiple cruise missiles into the sea in its fifth test of such weapons since January. South Korea's military said, extending a streak in weapons demonstrations that's elevating tensions in the region. Speaking of defense, the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin released from Walter Reed National Military Medical Center Tuesday, ending a brief admission that began on Sunday. He's apparently doing okay and resumed his duties on Tuesday night. This is a pretty big story. I might even bring a guest on to discuss the industry. I know I'm going to talk to Barry Ritholtz later tomorrow about several issues, maybe this one as well. But thousands of drivers for delivery and ride-hailing apps staged a work stoppage Wednesday to bring attention to what they say are low wages and dangerous working conditions. The stoppage targeted trips to and from airports in 10 major U.S. cities: Chicago, Hartford, Connecticut, Providence, Rhode Island, Newark, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Tampa, Orlando, and Miami, and Florida, and Austin, Texas. Justice for App Workers is behind it, coalition representing drivers and deliveries for the top service provider apps. So go support that organization. Maybe I'll get someone from that group. Well, how about this? Paxlovid, the highly effective antiviral pill that can prevent COVID from becoming severe, now has a list price of nearly $1,400 for a 5-day treatment course. Thanks to an innovative agreement between the Biden administration and drugs manufacturer Pfizer, Americans can still access the medication free or at very low cost through a program called PAXS. Problem is that too few people, including pharmacists, are aware of it, but now you as a stand-up listener are. You're welcome for the PSA. Of course, finally, I guess the biggest story is, I'm not mentioning it because it was reported, I mentioned it last night on news, and I know that you already know about it, but it's the fact that Democrats got George Santos' seat and gained a seat in the House, that the polls got it wrong again, and that running on the issue of immigration and the migrant issue didn't help Republicans win, and another Trump endorsement loses, and they keep losing because of him. There's a lot of the takeaway that I'm hearing, and I look forward to talking with you about that and all of the rest of the news tonight at our Hangout. But now it's time to get to some clips, some audio clips from yesterday's news cycle as well. Here's what I saw clamoring around the echo chambers, going viral, and or just being important. You can always send headlines and clips to me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, but here's what I found. I'll get the hard one out of the way first, just because I think it's important to play. I hadn't heard it, but this has come back up as a result of the shooting at the Kansas City Chiefs parade today. This is the disgraced former president at an NRA convention or gathering back in a few days ago in Pennsylvania, warning this is Donald Trump's voice that you're about to hear, but it's important because he takes credit for doing nothing on guns.
During my 4 years, nothing happened, and there was great pressure on me having to do with guns. We did nothing. We didn't yield. And once you yield a little bit, that's just the beginning. That's the avalanche begins.
During my 4 years, I did nothing on guns. An incredibly important moment that got lost, I think, in the last few days and worth bringing back up and probably worth putting in a campaign ad or two. Also speaking at that South Carolina rally for President Trump was the Republican congresswoman from South Carolina, one of them. It's Nancy Mace, who apparently everybody who has ever met her, including many of her husbands, don't like her. But anyway, I just like that she bombed with this joke, so I wanted to share it with you.
Joe Biden tells us those classified documents were secure, but that garage was just as secure as his southern border.
Oh, and let's not forget South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, who had this to say before Donald Trump came out there on Valentine's Day.
And he'll be here in just a little while. And when you see him, let's make sure on Valentine's Day we share our love for Donald J. Trump. What's up, John?
Oh, man. So tough. Wow. Well, what a crowd there in South Carolina for Trump last night. All right, let's take a listen now to the chief of the Kansas City Police on that shooting at the Super Bowl parade yesterday. This is Chief Stacey Graves.
I'm angry at what happened today. The people who came to this celebration should expect a safe environment. We had over 800 law enforcement officers, Kansas City and other agencies, at the location to keep everyone safe. Because of bad actors, which were very few, this tragedy occurred, even in the presence of uniformed law enforcement officers, who again ran towards them and took them into custody. To the people who were injured in this tragedy, our hearts go out to you and your families.
Well, there's the point. Even with all those cops there, still, people got killed and people got shot, people got terrorized because, well, the guns. I like this clip from Congressman James McGovern on the House floor yesterday.
We had a bipartisan bill that was passed in the Senate to help aid our allies in Ukraine and in Israel. And the Republican leadership is blocking it, can't even get a vote. So you are responsible. My friends on the other side are responsible for basically setting the world afire right now, creating all this insecurity, and potentially giving Vladimir Putin, a free pass to go in and to invade Ukraine. I never thought we would be at this point.
Well, guess who you're working with or against? I mean, people like Kevin McCarthy, who on his way out yesterday, here is tape. You can't hear it that well. I think you can hear it okay. Here he is throwing his former colleague Nancy Mace under the bus, saying she needs to get help, and then saying that Matt Gaetz lies about who he sleeps with. So he sounds like he's burning it all down. Here's that.
I hope Nancy gets the help she needs. I really do.
Are you going to give her any help?
No, I am not help financially. I just hope she gets the help to straighten out her life. I mean, she's got a lot of challenges. No one will stay working for her.
Has there ever been any conversations between you and the former president about Matt Gaetz and his decision to throw you out? Is he supportive of that?
I don't know how close you probably think the president is to Gaetz, but you should figure that out.
They're not actually that close? Gaetz makes it out to be like they're...
I'm sure Gaetz probably makes a lot out of it. He probably lies about who he sleeps with, too.
He probably lies about who he sleeps with, too. All right, let's head over to CNN, where there's a lot of analysis that apparently last night in the special election in Long Island, a lot of Republican voters, voters in general, said they voted for the Democrat because Republicans taint the bipartisan border security deal. Could that be real?
I heard from voters that they were these are obviously very well-informed voters, right, but they were at the polling station. They were voting early. And several of them said to me that they don't want to vote for the Republican because it's clearly impossible to get a solution on the issue of immigration. They said the border problem, the immigration issue, the migrant issue in their district was the top issue for them. And that the fact that Republicans killed that bipartisan deal put them over the edge to vote for Tom Suozzi, and immigration was their top issue. So I think that there's something.
Well, we'll see if there's much to that point, but Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut tweeted about that clip saying, "I didn't spend 4 months negotiating the bipartisan bill for political advantage. I wanted a result, but Republicans have handed us a winning issue, and we will capitalize on it." All right, Chris Murphy, like it. And here's one more take on it from Fox News with a Republican congressman being asked about that. Let's see what Mike Waltz has to say.
The New York special election that took place yesterday, the Democrat won, even though the Republican was pushing the immigration issue front and center. Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think when we unpack that, that's going to have a lot more to do with mail-in ballots and with early voting and a storm happening the day of voting where most of our voters vote. So I think that's going to be more of a turnout story than it is an issue story. But the Democrat was talking about the border, too. Everybody's talking about the border. And at the end of the day, we have to hold someone accountable. I asked my colleagues, if you had an attorney general that just disagreed with the law, refused to enforce it, like a lot of these Soros local prosecutors, would we just say, oh, well? No, we would take action, and that's what the American people are demanding we do.
Congress. What is a Soros? I'm joking on that. Sorry. Oh, apologies for that. All right, well, let me get now to the final clip, which is the jokes. I like to end the terrible news usually segment on a laugh, and tonight it's brought to us again by Stephen Colbert at CBS Late Show, talking about disgraced former President Trump inviting Russia to invade NATO member countries.
Folks are still rattled by Trump's statement that he would encourage Russia to do what it wanted to our NATO allies, and I'm being told right now that Putin has pushed France out of a window. Well, now we have an update from former National Security Advisor and Colonel Sanders' brother who went to Kentucky Fried Law School, John Bolton. In an upcoming book, Bolton predicts that if Trump is elected, NATO would be in real jeopardy. I think he would try to get out. And you know he wouldn't do it to their face. He would just send NATO one of those Pizza Hut breakup pizzas. This is such a shocking idea that President Biden took a break from succumbing to entropy to express his opinion.
It's dumb, it's shameful, it's dangerous, it's un-American.
Strong words, Joe. And coincidentally, Trump's new campaign slogan.
All right, there you go. Stephen Colbert on the CBS Late Show last night. Well, it's now time to get to my guests, and I can't do this show without your support. Remember, patreon.com/Pete Dominick, so I can get these brilliant folks on each and every day. And today, obviously no exception. I've talked to him many times over the years. I first met him when he was involved with the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America organization, as was I. He, of course, is a U.S. Army veteran who served in the war in Iraq. He's also the author of 4 books. His work has appeared in Esquire, ESPN, New York Times, Wired, and many other places. He's the recipient of all kinds of writing awards and fellowships, and was selected the 2022 Hemingway-Pfeiffer Museum Writer in Residence. He lives in Tulsa, Oklahoma with his wife and kids, who I also have met. And I'm very excited to have him back on the show to talk about his new book, Daybreak. It's a novel. It's really good. I normally don't talk to authors of novels, but this one is so important. It's based on his 3 trips to Ukraine, and I think it does a really good job at explaining the stakes and the humanity of these people. Really happy to have him back. I hope you'll get his book. Let's do it right now with Matt Gallagher. All right, there he is. I've just told you all about him, and his new book is out, and I want to make all kinds of jokes to welcome you to the conversation, but when someone has a new book out, you have to start with congratulations. I can only imagine how difficult this was. Congratulations. Daybreak, another novel.
Appreciate it, Pete. Thanks so much, and it's good to be with your lovely face again, talking matters of the world.
You've always had a thing for my face. I appreciate that. And I've always had a thing for your hair. I'm not going to lie to you.
I'm just, I'm 40. I'm just happy to have it still, to be honest.
Yeah, you're doing great. You're doing great. You've got the 2 kids. You've got the dog. You've got a wife who is, a pretty big deal in her own right. And you're doing life. And now you've got a book out. And one has to wonder, how would you possibly write a novel? And that is kind of an interesting answer for anybody. How does anybody get anything done, much less a creative project like this, when you've got a life like yours?
Arduous daily routine is how this one came out. I'm lucky enough to have a writing fellowship here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I have a kind of an office space, and forcing myself to write this book. There's an urgency to it, I think, because it's about the ongoing Ukraine war. So that kind of helped me. And yeah, best part of my day, picking up my kids. The second best part of the day, dropping them off. So, then I could turn my attention to this story. And my 3rd novel, 4th book, and this one kind of tumbled out of me in a way that the others were kind of wrestling them out of me. And I'm not quite sure, there's kind of an ethereal artistic thing going on with that. But for whatever reason, this one just kind of came out clean and smooth. And I think part of it was because this war is still going on, and maybe my own small way, I hoped I could influence some minds and readers that are maybe not as familiar with this subject as I'd hoped for them to be.
Well, this book accomplishes that in so many different ways. But I think as I analyze you and your life and career as a writer and as a veteran, you wrote after your experience in Iraq. You always wrote. I'm sure you were writing then. I'm sure you wrote parts of it then. But then you are now an established writer with an established family, and you choose to go to a war zone as a journalist and then go back. Have you been twice?
3 times now. 3 times.
So you're already an established writer, and now you're almost, in a way, you're writing a book. You must have known that you had the book in you to write. And so to hear you say that it tumbled out, it's to some extent, it must be because of those experiences that you had. So before we get into the novel, which is just so important and thoughtful and heartbreaking, I want to talk about the heartbreak that is the war and what you've seen. Why did you go there 3 times? I asked you this question last time we talked. I think I was interviewing you for your piece, and was it Esquire?
Correct.
And why would you leave your family and go to a war zone, knowing what war zones look like because you'd already fought in one?
The first time I went was as a volunteer to help some friends train a group of civilians and also family members of one of them. It felt like I would never be able to forgive myself for not going because of kind of the moral clarity presented in this war that was certainly not my experience in Iraq.
Right.
And, a lot of folks have not experienced in most wars, right? War is never good. Occasionally there is a just or necessary war. And in my estimation then and still, Ukraine's defense and their fight for self-determination is that. Going back as a journalist was a different experience, but I think I wanted to see the broader human perspective of how this war is being fought and conducted, not just by Ukrainian soldiers, but by the society, which is so different than kind of how America's conducted our foreign wars for so long, right? Like there's a very pronounced and deliberate, I think, separation of the population from our wars and from the consequences of those wars.
There can be no comparison because the wars that we have fought were not on our ground, and nobody living in America today has seen an invasion. We've seen our terrorist attacks. That's what we saw. Right. Pearl Harbor, if they're still alive, I guess. 9/11, other individual terrorist attacks from foreigners. But now, of course, the threat is domestic terrorist attacks. But the point being, the one you're making, the Ukrainian people have to save themselves in their own yards, homes, apartments, houses, streets, in their own country. Americans, we can't relate to that. Most people hopefully can't relate to that in the world, but we certainly can't. Is that what you're saying?
No, yeah, you still see that kind of in the ongoing debate about the war now, right? Like, why don't they just give peace a chance? I mean, we're seeing this from Elon Musk.
Wow.
Okay, well, peace for Ukrainians means if they put down their arms, every one of their cities turns into Mariupol. Ukrainian children are kidnapped and forcibly sent into Russia for cultural re-education camps. This is not a war of choice. And you can see from elements, I think, of particularly the hard right, but even elements of the hard left as well, just an incomprehension of a war that has to be fought this way of defense. There is no kind of other out for the Ukrainian people. But there's not. I've talked to these people. I've met them. Having the intellectual humility to just shut up and listen to them and let them tell their stories is something we all need to do. But intellectual humility and Americans is not a pairing that goes well together. And
you know what? I've actually heard enough from you right now.
Fair.
On this experience that you had in Ukraine, because we haven't even gotten to your 3rd trip. So the second time you went as a journalist and the first time you went to help and to train, and you've talked to us about those, and we could continue. I mean, a lot of that I'm sure you put in the book. And now the 3rd time, why did you go back to Ukraine?
Went back the 3rd time also as a journalist, mostly to focus on Ukrainians, tell an all Ukrainian story. The first 2 articles and trips and kind of an American and Ukrainian fusion. To be honest, it was a way to get the pieces placed in the magazine, to get Western eyeballs onto these stories. At that point, the 3rd time we went, it was this past August. I felt like I'd earned enough capital with the readership and with the magazine to be able to tell a story all about Ukrainian citizen soldiers. So each subject of that 3rd piece are regular people who 2 years ago now were having everyday lives, whether they were, bus drivers or teachers, just kind of, local activists or whatever, who are now serving in the military, whose lives have been completely upended and changed, but they're now, on the front line defending Ukraine. And, we went to Bakhmut, we went to Kherson, which had been in the southeast that had been occupied by Russia and recently liberated. And, seeing not just how the soldiers are fighting this, but how, Ukrainian civilians living near the front lines are enduring the war. It was really interesting. It was real grim, to be honest with you. But there's a resolve there that I think is hard for some Western observers to understand. That, I mean, they're going to fight this whether they're getting weapons from us or not. They're just going to die more, but they're not going to let Russia come take their land. They're not going to let Russia come take their kids without a fight. And we're such a fat, spoiled people by and large. I think we just have a hard time understanding that this is literally an existential threat, that Putin is not being euphemistic when he says Ukraine should not exist, that he doesn't believe Ukraine is a real country or a culture or a society. Take him at his word, right? I mean, Maya Angelou said, when people tell you who they are, believe them. This is a classic example. I mean, we saw it last week with the Tucker Carlson interview, right? Tucker kept waiting for him, kept trying to give him, this kind of apologist. Oh, it's because of NATO, right? NATO's encroaching. And Putin wouldn't even lie. Wouldn't even give him the kind of stupid lies that Carlson wanted him to parrot. No, he's like, no, it's because this belongs to us. Very open about his imperialistic ambitions.
Right.
Let's believe him.
What would you say to the senators and the congressmen who had the opportunity to vote for Ukraine aid? I guess 18 Republicans did. I think all the Democrats did. What would you say to them? You've heard all of the arguments. And, one of the base arguments that you hear from my local MAGA Facebook friends are that Russia didn't do anything to me. That's not my fight. Stop being a warmonger. And then, of course, you hear in Congress, they're talking, the argument is, let's take care of our border first. I think that's a pretty convincing one to a lot of people, apparently. What would you say to people who are on the fence to support that war in any way, because either it perpetuates the war or they don't think it's our business? You've seen it. You've seen the faces. You've seen the towns. You've seen the death. You've seen the damage. You're an American. You've also seen it in Iraq. What would you say to those people?
There are two elements of this. There's the moral element and then the geopolitical one. I mean, the moral one seems very clear to me, right? If you believe in peace, you believe in supporting Ukraine because Russia will destroy them, will kidnap children, will level entire cities the way they did to Chechnya, the way they did to parts of Georgia, the way they have already done to parts of the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine. There's a textbook. We know how this plays out, and it ends with more death and destruction. Okay. On top of that, I mean, Ukrainian people they are who Americans pretend we are. They're innovative. They're freedom loving. One of the bizarre aspects of this is that, I think most Ukrainians would probably identify themselves as conservative, kind of in the Ronald Reagan fashion and tradition, because for very justifiable reasons, given the history of communism in that area of the world, there's some real fear of top-down government. Right. So in a vacuum, pretty sure they would be a Republican country, at least, to bring our definition of the term there. Okay, but sometimes these moral arguments don't land with people, right? The self-described pragmatists. How does this affect me? I'm not an emotional person. You can't talk to me about dead kids. Okay, let's talk about how this will affect you. I mean, you want to be an isolationist. You want to be hyper-focused on border security. Fine. I don't agree with you, but that is certainly your choice as a citizen in this country. Well, you're a fool if you think a war that continues on that's going to create a huge refugee crisis in Europe isn't going to spill over and affect our border security. We already saw it with Syria, how many of the European countries were overwhelmed. We did a piss poor job in comparison accepting Syrian refugees.
Right.
Absolutely. A lot of Ukrainians are going to flee there and have the connections to get to Canada, to get to the States. There's going to be a spillover effect, Mr. Pragmatist. Have you thought this through? Probably not. The other aspect of this is Putin has been very clear that he's not going to stop with just Ukraine. They literally just this morning, it came out that they added the Estonian prime minister to their death target list. Well, guess what?
Well, what a good morning it must be for him.
Good morning. Guess what? Estonia is a NATO country, right? So, we roll on Ukraine. What you think Article 5 in the NATO doctrine is somehow going to hold him back after he feels emboldened?
What would you say at that point? The question has to be asked to you. I have to get your take on it. Sure. If Donald Trump were president, he's already said what he would do. If the NATO countries don't pay, he said Russia can do whatever he wants. What is your reality response to his crazy Earth 2 kind of comment?
what a betrayal, right? What a betrayal. The fact that this man is now in charge of Ronald Reagan's party is just, we're in the upside down world. But the practical aspect of that is, let's say we live in a world where Emperor Trump has all the control like he wants, like he still doesn't understand how NATO actually works, right? Like he thinks they pay dues and stuff because he's a moron, because he has that mob boss mentality. He does not understand how anything can't be brokered with currency. Well, guess what? Poland and the Baltic states are going to war. Germany is probably going to war with Russia. Another world war has already broken out. And the whole reason for having an organization like NATO is that for 75 years, after 2 world wars, by and large, a long peace has held, right? So all the pragmatists, all the geopolitical pragmatists that can't be bothered with the other people's dead kids, suddenly need to worry about their own dead kids being sent to World War III because absolute chaos is enveloping the European continent.
Exactly the point I was hoping you would make. Exactly the point. Your kids or your grandkids are potentially going to have to serve in that war. Or you could send money to Ukraine to fight and win that war now. You could win that war now. I think that we have a lot of frozen thinking in this country about past wars and past conflicts, and whatever we learn, our opinions, and we bring our politics to it all, and we can't see this specific situation for what it is. Do you think, how much of that do you think is true?
100% American hubris. Like we're constantly viewing conflict through the prism of our own experience, right? Like, I don't want this to be like Vietnam. I don't want this to be like Iraq or Afghanistan. Okay, referencing history is good, but take a step back and find an actual parallel for what it is. And the closest parallel for anybody who's actually read some history books is probably Spain, late 1930s Spain, with the Spanish Civil War, that Western allies did not respond to it in force. So it ended up being kind of a dress rehearsal for World War II. It's not a coincidence that both previous world wars kicked off in that region of the world. Here we have a group of freedom-loving people willing to fight and die on the West's behalf, as long as we outfit them with the right weapons and send them the right air defense weapons so they can protect their families. And we're not willing to, only after 2 years. Also, like, that's the other pathetic thing about this is it's only really been 2 years of kind of the large scale war. That's really not that long. And suddenly, you talk these senators, these congressmen, mostly on the right, saying that they're war weary. There's a group of people involved in this war that have the right to be war weary, and it's not Republican congressmen. It's the actual Ukrainian civilians who have been sending their brothers and husbands to the front lines for years now.
There's a whole lot of actual still sitting senators who supported and perpetuated America's occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. Many of them, especially in the Senate and some in the House, are still there. And they supported those wars. And now people like Lindsey Graham, of course, are criticizing them. I mean, we can't really talk too much about him because he really can't. I mean, like, why? Why treat him like a normal person? He is a pilot fish. He is a barnacle. He will go whatever way the wind blows. He's a hollow barrel, and he will die a lonely man, is my hope, is my great, great hope for what he has done to this country. But I feel like people still have a hard time understanding why we need to support this war. Sometimes people make the argument to try to convince them that all this money that we're spending, which is not that much money in the grand scheme of things, very small percentage of our defense budget. What's defense for if not to prevent us from sending our own kids to this war and everything else about Russia's aggression? But more importantly, people say a lot of the money comes back here to actual American civilians who work in defense contract and the supply chain all the way up to it. Do you think that that's a fair argument? Is that true? Is that? Well,
it's certainly a fair argument. Convincing, probably not, especially, Mitch McConnell is many things, and a deeply imperfect messenger on this point is one of them. But there's truth to that. Like, I think roughly a third of the $61 billion package that's been proposed actually doesn't go to Ukraine. It's to replenish our stock of weapons that have already been sold to the Ukrainians. Listen, I'm no hawk. I've written and meant terrible things about the military-industrial complex, and it deserves it. But at the same time, what are you going to do? Their weapons work. All you need to do is talk to the Ukrainian, talking about how the interceptor air defense system protects Kyiv and Odessa. Watch a video of the HIMARS annihilating very distant Russian command posts. They're good at what they do.
Those
are
like
what they do.
Artillery missiles or something. Those weapons, HIMARS, are like howitzers or something.
But and they're mobile. They're mobile. So, just accepting the world as it is, with all its flaws, in this case, does mean that our defense complex can be tapped for protecting innocent lives. And if that bothers you, I'm sorry. That's the real world.
I want to get into the book a little bit here, but I have a kind of, maybe it's a sadistic question, and I don't, and maybe I'll edit it out if you think it's inappropriate, but I have a certain curiosity about the type of warfare that is occurring. What is it like? Can you describe the scene? I've heard trench warfare. I've heard, snipers and frontline. I feel like I've heard hand-to-hand combat, but sometimes you hear the numbers, especially of Russians dying, but not to mention, obviously, so many Ukrainians have also died and been severely injured for the rest of their lives. Not to mention, obviously, civilians not fighting. But I mean, my question is about the actual warfare, and maybe it's inappropriate. But I feel like, you talk about it in the book, and I feel like it's important to tell people what's happening.
So it kind of depends where you're at currently. Far south, down in the Kherson region, we interviewed like a special forces team that are conducting kind of raids on boats to sabotage behind Russian lines. Up north in Sumy Oblast, interviewed a couple guys serving in a unit. They're kind of doing like long range reconnaissance, cat and mouse games with the Russian Spetsnaz special forces units. But the headlines are justifiably so are kind of focused on the trench warfare style that's happening along the Eastern Front in and around Bakhmut. One big difference compared to most Western wars recently is the amount of artillery and sky, like drones, right? A lot of cheap homemade drones, heavy artillery bombardments. Any Western vet I talked to over there that served in Iraq or Afghanistan, that was the first thing they always mentioned, is how different that aspect is compared to Syria, Iraq, or Afghanistan, where we took for granted. We controlled all that. We had other challenges, other weapons to be concerned about, right. But nothing quite like an artillery bombardment that sounds out of World War I. One story I heard that has really lingered with me in terms of Russian tactics is the way they use human waves to not just to kind of it's not just like zombie style, like Walking Dead, like I think sometimes it gets described as. What they'll do is they'll send these waves, many of whom are still prisoners, some unarmed, vaguely at a Ukrainian defensive position. And it's a way to tease out where the heavy machine guns of the Ukrainians are, right? Because that's where
Jesus Christ.
They'll unload to kind of
go out there
down.
And get shot at, so we know where the machine guns are, and it's several men at once or something.
Dozens upon dozens upon dozens,
just running across the field and just getting gunned down.
Yep, and that way, then the Russian commanders who are observing know where to call artillery, which positions to call artillery on. So
Jesus
very different
Christ.
style, yeah, and there's no NATO training could have prepared these Ukrainian soldiers for that. This is stuff they've learned on the fly. When this war is over, they're going to be teaching Western militaries about the tactics and operations they've been conducting, because nothing in recent history compares to this.
I'd love for you to read from the book, get people sauced up about it. Your writing is so wonderful. I love to hear that you're working on a book, much less that a new book has come out. I was so excited to get an advance copy to read it. And as always, your prose, your writing, what do they say? You've done many fellowships. You're such a serious, big deal writer. Who can say that of our generation? There's no writers. Nobody can make a living writing. And yet look at you, because you're that good. You can't take these compliments. So just read from the book, Matt.
Thank you, Pete. That's very nice. I'll just read from the first couple pages.
Sure.
Basically, the story kicks off joining two American veterans of Afghanistan riding a bus into Ukraine at the onset of the invasion. They're going back for very different reasons. The bus pitched east through midnight black, and Luke Paxton sat with his head against the window, alone with his thoughts. Winter clawed at him through the glass, but he kept himself nestled against it. He found the tinges of the outside cold bracing and wanted to keep awake. He wet his throat and stared out at the flurries of snow dusting the road. Dark, baleful forest lay beyond. A convoy of supply Humvees crested a small hill, pushing the other way, toward the border. Something sharp and hot swelled in Pax's chest. Haven't felt like this in a long time, he thought. It was thrill. It was fear. More than anything, Pax felt like someone again. They'd crossed an hour before. First had come potholes, then bunkers and checkpoints with barrels of fire licking the night. The checkpoints were for show, performative, barely better than nothing, and maybe not even that. Men with flashlights and slung hunting rifles, a gesture at presence for the sake of itself. What they need, Pax thought, is razor wire. Some HESCO barriers staggered to force vehicles into a funnel. A machine gun on overwatch ready to snuff out any runaways and squirters. The basics. They'll learn, he thought. It's all new here. The bus slowed over an old bridge, reaching a village. Brittle Ukrainian sounded through a loudspeaker, reminding of the national blackout. At a bend, a tiny church glowed dim, a mural of Jesus holding a candle charting through the snow. Pax blinked and blinked, but the image stayed with him long after they left. He hadn't believed for many years, but still wanted to be a person who could. Across the aisle, Lee was draped over his assault pack, snoring away with the clean conscience of a man who knows his place in the world. Pax had dressed to blend in, jeans, a simple black jacket. Lee wore a hoodie with a skull superimposed in front of crossed rifles, the word infidel screaming above the logo. He raised the sleeves to his elbows to show off his tattoos of flames and razor wire and old unit crests. A name tape and subdued American flag patched across his assault pack, completing the look. When Pax had teased him about it at the airport, Lee had dug in. I'll be the only Asian around for a fucking 1,000 miles. People need to know they're dealing with a killer. He wasn't, though. That was the whole thing. Lee's kill had eluded him through all his deployments, always seconds late to the firefight, a hesitant lieutenant at his shoulder, or a vexing, oblivious civilian standing between him and his chosen glory. It was just luck, happenstance, like so much else in combat, but Lee hadn't been able to shake the sense of lost purpose in the homeland, so now he was here to again carry the gun. We gotta be there, man, Lee had said when he reached out over the phone, trying to find a travel partner as crazy or as bored as he was. They need people like us. They? Us? Open questions. Lee had said yes since no one else would. He'd heard it in Lee's voice, something between despair and disgust. And because he'd had no reply for Lee's next line, delivered with all the subtlety of an ice pick. What else you got going on?
What else you got going on? Man, it's just so great. I couldn't put it down. And hearing you read it, it's kind of fun because I saw it coming. He's got all these badass tattoos and his hat and all his gear, and yet talks about being a killer, but he isn't one. And I'm sure there's a lot of guys like that. It doesn't make them still not badasses and, volunteers to go into harm's way. But as you said, what else you got going on? And just one question about these characters based on your own experiences and the experience of any person who served in combat and wartime, which is, you write later, boy goes to war to become a man, comes back someone he doesn't know, Pax thought, to a country he doesn't recognize. The biggest cliche on the fucking planet. The least I can do for anyone is keep it to myself. And that's one of my favorite things because I was almost like, oh, that's a weird cliche for Matt to write. And the next sentence was the biggest cliche. But I still think cliches matter. It's important. It's important to this conflict. It's important to the war that you served in. Just unpack that in terms of reality and why it is such a cliche to come back to a country he doesn't know. I think there's a lot of truth to your generation of veterans, but also and doesn't recognize, and obviously goes to war a boy and becomes a man. I think everybody can understand that. But how does that apply, that rule, that cliche to your generation?
I think we have been hyper conscious, even when we were maybe deployed, but certainly since we've come back as veterans, how politicized and used we can be. Like even in my own little literary world, about 10 years ago, the high literati kind of paid us a lot of attention. It was fun, don't get me wrong, but it was for political reasons, right? They wanted to they were hoping that maybe a little generation of little Tim O'Briens, a writer I respect immensely, but is devoutly anti-war, could be cultivated and sold and marketed. And most of us would describe ourselves as anti-war, but it comes with qualifications. It comes with, it comes with some thought and specificity. And, I have plenty of off the record anecdotes about encounters with these kind of people who felt like we weren't enough. We didn't fit the mold that they wanted for us when we were platformed. And that's happened on a political level, on a national political level, the way veterans stories can be peddled or marketed. And then God knows both parties do plenty of it and still do it. And I think as we've gotten kind of older and maybe gotten further away from our own tours, we're just kind of fucking over it by and large. Like it's exhausting. It'll happen again. There's not a doubt in my mind the next time America engages in a long-term foreign conflict. And I hope it's not for many years, but it probably won't be. The same kind of stock stories, the same kind of stock cliches will occur. And hopefully my generation of veterans can help make things a little bit easier for the ones that come after us. But, as for kind of then putting it into literature and into a story, soldiers and veterans, by and large, they're rough men and women, to kind of borrow the old Orwell quote, rough men willing to do violence on our behalf, presenting them in full dimensionality, making them heroic, but also kind of making them rough, making them selfish in some cases, making them fail in some cases is kind of important, I think, to tell a fully human story. And sometimes readers aren't looking for that in these kind of works. You have your kind of Brad Thor readers that just kind of want an action-packed hero story. And then other people just kind of want a real sad sack victim story, to explain, I don't know, some kind of point, some kind of macro political point. I don't think that's what good literature doesn't seek to do either of those things. Good literature is about the messy grays of existence, about people trying and failing until they succeed, about the conflicts and nuances that populate everyday life. Like, yeah, this is a story about the Ukraine war, but it's also about Svetlana, a Ukrainian woman trying to raise a child in the midst of this, separated from her husband who's off fighting at the front. But she has a lot of dark feelings about that. Oh, and now she has to deal with the American lover she had 10 years ago who shows up at her doorstep saying he's there to help, but can't articulate how. Capturing kind of the actual human experience of this was why I sat down to write this book. And I think it's what the best war literature does, the best war literature that lasts, at least. It's about the war that it's set in, sure, but it's also about the people trying to make the best of they can in a terrible situation.
Well, you've done it. You've accomplished all that. You've done it again. It's multidimensional, as you say, and it's very important. Without bragging or talking necessarily about your own work, why do you think the type of work that you're doing in this book and your other novels, but specifically in Daybreak, why is it important to have literature written from the point of view that you have in the way that you write it? I'm trying to broadly describe what you're doing and compare it to others so that you can make the point about why its impact matters.
Sure. No, it's a good question.
Because I always get stuck on nonfiction. Like, I want to talk to you about, and then now when I'm talking about a novel, I'm like, well, it's a novel. Like, why, it's just a novel. It's just a fantasy world. It didn't happen that way. He made a lot of it up. It's based on things. So why? That's what I mean.
Yeah, sure. So I think fiction is, even in 2024, a lot of this stuff that I put into this book, maybe they're anecdotes I heard second or third hand over there that I couldn't source.
Right.
Or a piece of dialogue is taken from a conversation that I had off the record with a Western vet about the front. Yeah. Maybe it's more about kind of capturing the emotional truths of a moment rather than the hard record. I mean, I think journalism is vital. Journalism is important. I think some great works of journalism and nonfiction are going to emerge from Ukraine and
including your work and your reporting from there. Yeah.
But fiction for me as a writer is the ultimate pursuit, because if you do it right, if you do it well, you can find something that lasts beyond the moment. You can write something that lasts beyond the moment. I was, keenly aware I'm writing in the tradition of Hemingway or Conrad or Graham Greene, Orwell even, and those artists and their works have meant a great deal to me as a reader. In some ways they've even kind of shaped the trajectory of my life. at the same time, it's 2024, right? America's role in the world is very different. How other people relate and interact with America is very different. So trying to capture the authentic, honest experience of that and putting into fiction, melding all these things together is the ambition. I'll admit I have high literary ambitions for this, and it's both rooted in imagination and literary history, but also, hard experience in Ukraine, whether my own or other people's that they've been kind enough to share with me.
Well, so well said. And I really am loving it. And I hope that everybody goes and buys this book and gets all of Matt's books. Before I let you go, let's do a cable news style or McLaughlin style kind of binary question to pump up our ratings.
Let's do it.
Let's simplify the world and the most severe problems like this. Matt Gallagher, you've seen war. Is America more likely to have a civil war or be involved in a world war? Gallagher, go!
World war. Civil war, we're too fat and happy. I don't see it happening here. Domestic violence, armed violence in the States by groups like the Proud Boys and stuff, very possible, especially in an election year. But a full-scale civil war, sorry, the economy's too good. Almost historically, anytime there's a real civil war that's occurred, it's also kind of mired in real poor economic conditions. So the partisan leaders driving the differences have numbers to recruit from.
I so agree with that analysis. The fat and happy thing. And I think that, and I hope I'm right, hope you're right, but not that there's a world war, but that we don't have a civil war at least, is because after January 6th, all those guys went to jail. And those people, a lot of those people, most of them were doing pretty well, which goes against what you're saying. Except the point is, we all now, anybody who might be thinking about it, man, those people, that guy owned a franchise Chili's. Now he's in jail. He was doing good. That was a good life. And I think that that's absolutely the analysis that applies to America right now. It's really interesting to hear you say that. Things are going pretty well. I got a good job. I get vacations. I got a man cave. I got a cool car. I got some friends. My wife still has sex with me. What am I fighting? I mean, really, I'm joking, but that's exactly who we're talking about.
Nobody wants to hear it, right? Because there's plenty to complain about. But I mean, there are just limits to cosplaying when you have access to Netflix, when you can, go play Zelda for 36 hours. Do you want to give all that up because you were angry at the Capitol and got caught up in the moment and watched the man in a buffalo helmet parading around?
I think it was a bison. I think you should show respect.
It was a bison. You're right. Sorry.
Show respect to the Q shaman.
My apologies to the bison community.
Oh, you nailed that one. I always thought you were going to apologize to the Q shaman, but in fact, you apologized to the species of cattle you inappropriately said he wore upon his head. Matt, congratulations on this new book and whatever you're doing next. I'm sure it's going to be awesome. Wink, wink. Whatever it is, if it's a book, whatever it is, I'm sure it's going to be real good, and whoever is in your space gets the benefit from it. Now, get back to those kiddos and that dog, and thank you very much. I hope everybody will go out and buy the book. I'll tell you more about Matt after I hit stop.
Appreciate it, Pete. Always a pleasure.
You got it, buddy. Well, how about it, huh? Matt Gallagher, the passion, the fire, and the creativity, the brilliance. Love that guy. I've loved that guy for a real long time. I think you'll like the book. If you like novels, if you like stories about love and war and Hemingway. If you like Hemingway, you'll love Matt Gallagher and get all of his books. But go get Daybreak right now and let him know you heard him here on the show. And that's it. That's all I've got. I hope to see you at tonight's Hangout. I hope to see you in Las Vegas. And I hope to see you in my closet later on tonight. A bunch of us are going to join up and have a closet party. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm going to have some more wine. You guys are the best. I love you. Bye-bye.
over your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment.